Please turn on your microphone when speaking and mute when not speaking. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under the COC's jurisdiction. If you would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card by the door, give it to MAG staff. If you parked in the garage, parking validators are available by the door. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for the ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available for MAG staff. Brian, please take roll call. Please share your name, that you're present, and the organization you're with.
Letitia Brown Gambino,
Letitia Brown Gambino, present. Keys to change.
Tim Birch, Liz DaCosta, Michael Hughes,
Here, a new leaf.
Jessica Raymond, Charles Sullivan, Sienna Valdez, Cricket Weatherington,
Cricket
Rach-
Weatherington here. AHI, mic off.
Rachel Milne,
Rachel Milne, City of Phoenix.
Nate Smith,
Nathan Smith with Cass.
Chris Hallett,
Chris Hallett, City of Peoria here.
Caitlin Dean,
Caitlin Dean, Maricopa County.
Gabriel Jaramillo,
Gabriel Jaramillo, Vitals Health Foundation here.
Emma Garcia,
Emma Garcia, Valley Sun United Way here.
Matthew Kelly,
Matthew Kelly, Mercy Care.
Vicki Phillips.
Vicki Phillips, Community Bridges, and I believe Elizabeth DaCosta is now present.
Got
That
it.
my cue? Sorry for the delay. Elizabeth DaCosta with Access.
Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is a call to the audience. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under the COC or the Continuum of Care Board that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience agenda item unless the committee requests an exception to this limit. Bryant, were there any comments received or anyone who wishes to comment?
There were no comments received.
Thank you very much. All right. Our next item is the approval of the consent agenda. Items 3A, 3A through 3D are on the agenda for consent. Does any member of the board have questions, comments, or request a presentation on any of these items? No? Does any member of the public wish to comment on any of the items on the consent agenda? Okay. May I please have a motion to approve consent items 3A through 3D?
I move for approval of the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mike Hughes. May I have a second?
I'll second.
I'm sorry, who said that? Gabe. Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate it. All right. Is there discussion on the motion from the board or comments from the public? Okay. For those in the room, we will take a voice vote. Those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, please say nay. Okay, I will now ask Brian to proceed with roll call of those joining online.
Gabe Jaramillo,
Aye.
Emma Garcia,
Aye.
Nathan Smith,
Aye.
Liz DaCosta,
Yay.
Tim Birch.
Aye.
All right, thank you very much, Brian. All right, the next item up is the update to the COC membership policy. MAG staff will now propose minor updates to the COC membership policy with the goal of improving board member retention. Brian?
Thank you, Co-Chair Phillips. Next slide, please. So our current membership policy, there was a little bit of ambiguity under the charter with our current policy that I wanted to just clear up. Hoping that we'll be able to do that with a quick vote. I think it's something that we'll want to spend a little bit more time on with further annual charter updates that are, I think, forthcoming. But just to give you a quick overview of what the current policy states, we do 3-year terms, as I think most of you will be aware. We do annual elections. Our last one was between the months of September and November. And we don't have a process for elections that happen during the year unless membership falls below 9 people, where there's a provision that you have to then do an election because you do not have quorum. So what's happened a couple of times in the last year now is that folks who were elected at odd times, so not during the annual cycle, get in this position where their 3 years are up officially, but they're not eligible, or there's no election process happening at that moment. And so they're just sort of in this limbo, like they're in good standing, they show up at the meetings, they participate, but there's no election to renew them, and their 3 years is up. I think historically, maybe we've just said, you can stay on, even though your 3 years are up, and we'll just sort of, you can stay, and then during the next election cycle, we'll see if you want to renew. I'd like to clear that up so that there's no ambiguity, there's no concern about anybody saying, your 3 years were up, or why have you been on the board all this time? Nothing like that. And I think this should be a relatively easy thing to fix. So this came up recently, I think, with a few different members. If you have questions about that, I can certainly go into detail on it. But suffice to say, it's come up enough times that it is something that I want to address. Next slide. Thank you. So here's some proposed language to amend the charter relatively quickly here. This isn't the only way you could do this, but this would really, I think, get you through the current issue, and then we could add some more detail to this when we do the charter updates. Also open to any other recommendations on language updates. So in general, this addresses the issue of somebody terming out in between election cycles. And that's really all that this does. There may be other issues to talk about down the road. If somebody switches agencies, technically they're not allowed to continue on the board. Whether or not that's a policy we want to revisit, I think is something to talk about as well. But that's what this does for the moment. And below, you can see what that looks like in the context of the charter language. So that's from page 8 of the charter. The red highlight is the same in both bullet points. So we would just recommend that we update the charter as listed there. And that way, our current board member who is terming out, or who termed out last month actually, would be able to continue through until the next election cycle. Next slide. Let me just make sure I don't have anything else. Oh, these are just other examples. We can leave these up in a moment. So Tyler, can you go to the next one, and then we'll backtrack real quick. Just to say this up front, going forward, I think it would be appropriate for MAG staff to bring two months in advance, at least, let you know that there's people terming out. If somebody's about to term out, we'll let you know in advance. Up until now, that hasn't been a high priority just because we haven't had a policy to address it. So even if we'd known that, what would we have done exactly? So, but we'll do that. We'll commit to that. And then the second bullet point, just so you know, the next people terming out would be in September. So I'm not too worried about that, but just to give you an idea. Now, Tyler, if you don't mind going back to that slide, thank you. And then any questions you might have, we can talk through this, but these are examples of different membership policies around consecutive terms and length of tenure.
So this is Matt. I guess I would like to propose, I think we've talked about with regards to membership on the board, people have fallen off the board due to change of employers. And I know that this might be an attempt to address a specific instance right now. However, I'm wondering, since it's already been a point of discussion, if we wouldn't want to consider something more inclusive, considering the charter changes, adding an addendum to allow people to remain on the board, even if they do change entities, or at least a process by which a person could request to remain on the board during this whole process, considering as we lose people, as people change organizations, we all know this happens pretty regularly. Would we want to consider the ability for a board member to request to remain on the board, whether it's an application process or, a request that would then be reviewed and voted on by the board as part of that process? So in light of that, I did write some language because, so two things that I was kind of looking at, and I just kind of go to the charter. The first portion of the membership structure that I think we might want to call into question is the last sentence of the membership structure column says membership on the COC board pertains to the agency and not the individual. I might propose that we strike that altogether if we're going to add this addendum to that. And then in addition to that, the language that I wrote up, which I'm completely open to, is if a member changes entities / roles, the board member may submit a request with rationale to the board to complete their term as board member. Factors to consider would include support of the new entity to participate in the board, duplication of the entity representation on the board, and then also remaining in the region. Now, I'm open to adjusting that language in some way, shape, or form, but I wanted to write something up that kind of maybe got to the spirit of, I think, what we were looking to do.
Anybody else want to comment? I was also going to propose, I can get somebody from my team to put this language up online so we can see it. Give me just a second to do that.
Thank you so much. And yeah, and thank you, Matt, for being proactive with that work too. So I think for me, it's really important that we look at the membership structure. We defined that we would have like funders seats and then also this like regional representation where we've got someone from the West Valley, East Valley, and Central. Like there was a ton of historical conversation that went into how we make sure the regions have the right level of representation, even leading into they have to go to like the local jurisdiction and get voted in before coming in and filling a vacancy. So I think we need to propose looking at like which seats within our membership structure would we allow for flexibility if a person was to change organizations.
That's kind of why I put it as a request process, Liz, because I felt like then it was up to the board to kind of evaluate all of those situations to say, hey, this makes sense because they still either A, represent the region or meet the overall need of the board as far as representation is concerned, but it wasn't a guarantee. It was more or less the opportunity to, I guess, appeal to the board. But
okay. And I would almost ask though that we like put the membership structure up and consider making a few non-negotiables. And let's just look at if we need to do that because we do want to like a part of the HUD compliance is your membership structure. And
Right.
So I think we really want to set a precedence that makes sure that we have the right organizations at the table at all times.
I agree.
This is Gabriel. I think that's one of, as far as striking the last one, I do believe it opens it up a little bit more. Keeping that language in there to make sure we're in compliance and then adding additional language for review process for additional pertinent members, I think would be good. But as far as striking it, it might open up the membership to leave us out of compliance through HUD. I think that's my only concern with striking it as opposed to just adding additional language.
Is the membership related to the agency a requirement of HUD? Is that what I'm to understand?
Just that we establish membership structure. And so the fact that we have these designated seats is our documentation around our membership structure. And I would be concerned about giving too much flexibility in that. And I don't know if we can pull up the charter to just take a look at to see like could we even just say, hey, these ones are non-negotiable, but then everything else goes to the updated language that Matt's proposing.
Yeah, I can do that. Hold on one sec.
I just want to make sure, Matt, are we saying that it's on? I'm just sitting too far back. Are we saying that the agency still keep it at that or change it to the individual? I wasn't clear on after Liz's comment.
My only concern with the agency thing is that if we write this addendum to request this change, if it's tied to the agency, that kind of negates, I think, what I was writing to some extent, which is why I was proposing. I'm open to a change in that language to broaden it.
Matthew, I would agree. I don't think it should pertain to the agency.
I don't personally either, but I'm also just, if there's something that needs to be done to align with HUD to make it more clear, I'm happy to modify the language. I just felt like it might be creating a problem. If we can do the agency and or something, I would be open to that.
Uh, hey, Nathan Smith here. Just to clarify real quick. So we have, Liz, I think I'm looking at what you're looking for, one formerly homeless representative, one youth action board representative, and then down a ways, there's one municipality specific rep from West, Central, East, and Regional. And obviously making sure that we have someone from each agency that represents each of those buckets helps to ensure that we have great representation across the different kinds of perspectives here on the board. The challenge, Matt, that I see you trying to combat, I don't know if I have an answer. I think I'm just making sure I'm caught up to where everyone's at. But the challenge is great people walk out of the door, regardless of what agency they're with. They've made great contributions to the board. They have excellent insight. And then they go from an agency represented on this list to an agency not represented on this list, or they retire and want to be a volunteer, but they're not represented on this list and they have to go away just because of the way it's structured. So it sounds like it would be great if we could find a way to definitely make these positions non-negotiable. I see the benefit, Liz, that you're pointing out there. That is really good representation. But then also make it so that there's some fluidity, that we can retain someone, but still require that seat that they vacated be filled. So just that might be a way to get to the best of both worlds.
This is Cricket. Maybe the solution is, since we aren't bringing people on outside of the time when we do the applications, that they can request through the end of that cycle, because those seats aren't going to be filled by somebody else, right? So if, and then they can apply to fill a seat when applications open. So it fills the gap of the time if someone is, I'm going to use Jessica because she's not here. When Jessica left, right, like she had just missed the application time before she knew. So she could go ahead and fill out that to that next seat, because we're now down a member because of that. So that might solve everybody's problem, because even if it's a municipality, they can't apply until the open application. So, right?
That should not be the case. And
That's why we have this problem right now, is that we did allow like certain seats to be refilled at different times. And so that's why we have like.
Okay, so then we say the ones that Nathan read off, those get refilled, and the others that would have to wait, then that person Jessica could have said, can I stay on until the next thing, where she could apply again. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Is what I'm saying making sense to you, Matt?
No, I want a clear motion. So give me the clear motion.
What? Well, I didn't know I was making a motion. I was given a suggestion. I've got a vibe today.
So I think what you're proposing is exactly the same that they did with regards to the renewal portion. So basically extending their membership on the board until the renewal cycle completes. So for example, Jessica left Native American Connections, went to COPA, and that was in January. And so she could request to remain on the board until September when we did the renew, and she could apply under COPA. Okay. I'm done.
There's so much structure in what we did. It even leads into when you get applications, how you, we had a tool for how we weight the applicants, and it included underrepresented populations. There's a lot of stuff that went into the development of that charter. And so I think that we need to have a separate work group if we want to have a conversation around this that we can vote on. You have to imagine the local jurisdiction voting in a specific member to represent their region, and then that person leaving the municipality and going to work for a local nonprofit, but still being the representative of that local, of the region that the local jurisdiction voted in. Like, those are the types of things that we would be allowing that I think would be problematic.
I don't know that we would be allowing it though, because they would be requesting and the board could say no. Like it's not a given. You still have to ask and give the way Matt proposed it, there would still be a rationale about why. And so if we are not going to fill we're using Jessica because we know that there's other processes.
But let's use, like, for instance, if I were to not be at the city of Phoenix anymore, maybe I'd go and work for Chris at Peoria, and then Peoria would be double represented if the board chose to keep me on.
But we wouldn't.
Okay.
I think
Thank
that's
you for
why
that.
I specifically added the regional, the
Yeah.
basically the duplication of entities as part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that gets what Liz said, that there's some demarcs, a hard nose that you can't even consider them. And I agree with that scenario. But just-
And we have, like, even we built in funders and then the total number of funder seats. So there was like a lot of thought and time that went into the membership structure that I think we're trying to unravel for this particular case. And I think it makes sense to build in some flexibilities, but we need to look at the indirect unintended consequences of those decisions too. And like unraveling, I'm telling you, like hours and hours and hours of a work group having conversations around it to get it where it's at. That actually leads to a template that when we go through the voting process, there's a template that we can fill out that helps us weight the scores of applicants to make these decisions. So what I propose is that we have, I mean, we already have our charter update taking place right now, that we be thoughtful about this and have a work group discussion around it.
So Liz, this is Michael. What I'm hearing you say is this is more complicated than being able to solve in today's meeting.
That's
And putting a work group together to make sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed to be consistent where we move forward and it makes complete sense with a work
Yes.
presentation.
Yeah, and here it is. So if you scroll down, you can see more. Sorry, go ahead. There's the selection process for the West and East Valley, how the local jurisdiction communicates it. So when that seat goes vacant, we're supposed to, if you go down to the bottom, MAG is supposed to request applicants and resumes outside of our annual selection time.
Yeah, so a lot of really good work went into this charter, and I would say that it's pretty comprehensive. I think it's a strong charter. What I would say is that we've identified gaps, just as you do in any charter. So I would love to be able to fill a small gap in this one. That's why we propose it, but it's obviously, so Liz, the only thing I'm putting out there initially is that there's one member of the board who termed out recently, and I think it's not clear the process for that person staying on, other than the charter just says that that person is, it's allowable for that person to be reelected, but it doesn't, there's no clarity around when you would do an election. There's no provision to do an interim election for one person. And I think that would be probably not a great idea anyways. It would be a lot of work for one person to be elected. We could just write something that allows those folks to stay on. Anyway.
Can I ask Liz just a question? Like, is there a specific language that, considering we are doing a charter review, and I don't necessarily know if I disagree with the desire to want to do that, but while we're waiting for that to come through, whether that takes 3 months or 4 months or however many months it takes, is there a language that you'd be willing to approve today, considering we have this up for this one particular item?
Yeah, I didn't see in the language that this stopped us from our requirement to fill a vacant seat. Should a seat become vacant because a person leaves the organization. That's what I think we need to unravel that much further. But what I saw in the suggested language was that if a person still is on the board within their organization and seat in which they were accepted to the board for, and they're going to term prior to the annual renewal period, we can vote to extend that person as they were approved to go through the timeframe until that September, October. So that language, I didn't see anything that would then also allow for all these additional flexibilities. And I would be okay with that. I'm not sure what others think.
I guess that's why I'm asking. So yeah, it would be in addition to that specific language that's outlined in the packet itself, the language I wrote or whatever. Is there something that you would accept to allow for, as people are departing during this charter review process through the, everything that we voted on a month ago, that would allow those individuals?
It's just the term. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, that's okay. My apologies. I just want to, if there's a way that we can add that additional thing to keep those historical people who started this process as part of this process during this 3 months, is there a language that we would allow and then work on a full revamp of the membership moving forward through the charter review? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think if, Brian, if you could pull up the language you proposed.
Can do. Give me 1 second.
Sorry, we're like,
Yeah.
and then pull up this.
Seem to be beating us to death, but a question I have, I want to make sure I'm clear. So let's say, let's say Rachel was selected because of Phoenix representation. And then Rachel switched over to Avondale, so West Valley. Are we saying that if Rachel wanted to stay on, that she, until the next vote, that she could stay on if she was voted by the board for the next, let's say, 6-7 months? But doesn't that create conflict because there's no longer representation from the city of Phoenix? You follow what I'm saying? Like, she was selected, I'm using her as an example, for the Phoenix representation. She goes to the West Valley, and then she's voted to stay on for 6 or 7 more months until the next election. But then there's the vacancy that the Phoenix doesn't have, quote, what the charter was asking for and the amount of work that was done to make sure equal representation. That's why I'm starting to get lost. And I don't know if we really need to have a separate work group to go through these different scenarios so that we do it right.
Well, I would suggest that the board would have to vote in any case. So I do think if you were switching, like kind of in Matt's scenario where somebody switches agencies, I mean, to be frank, I think that there's a lot of value in that, and other charters do that effectively. But for the time being, I think you could say somebody terming out, the board could either vote or not vote under whatever the circumstances were. So if Rachel was leaving the city of Phoenix, maybe the board wouldn't approve that because they would want to put somebody from the city of Phoenix in that seat.
And because it's against the charter that says we have to do it that
Right.
way.
So there's two different issues here, right? So you're presenting one, somebody's term expires before September, October. Nothing else is changing and extending it. I support what's written as a sole and separate action. If you want to add what Matthew brought in, which is a completely different scenario that you're describing, I think it needs to be pushed to another time or the charter review. And so move.
So
That's the.
So the motion then is to approve Brian's language that a member's term expires outside of their normal selection period. The board may vote to extend their term until the next selection item. That's the proposal, so motion. And also to continue to work on the additional item around board seat.
Okay.
Yeah, did we get a motion to?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and second it. I still think it was valuable to bring up as a point of, it was really, this is something we've talked about 4 or 5 times, and I apologize, I didn't realize it was throwing this many wrenches. I was just trying to solve for potential shifts during this charter change. So I mean, I'm happy to second his motion to approve the language as it currently stands, and then we can proceed forward.
I don't think you have to apologize if you bring brownies. I think that's a rule.
All right. All right.
Thank you.
Any further discussion around the motion? Thank you, Matt, for seconding. Any further discussion? All right. We will now have members take part in voice vote. Those joining online may participate by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, we will conduct a roll call vote. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote for members? Those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay. All right. Staff, can you take roll call of the members who did not participate in the voice vote?
Tim Birch.
Aye.
Thank you, I'm sorry. Okay, next item up. COC Governance Charter Work Group.
Sorry,
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. There was more. Yeah.
Co-Chair Phillips, one other thing, this wasn't on the slides, but if, now that it's approved, if the board saw fit to vote in accordance with that language to approve Danielle Wright, who termed out in January, I think that would be appropriate to do so.
And so that's like what I think we want to have a bit more of a process for, and like not trying to be a pain, but we need, like, in order to do that, we need to know what seat does Danielle fill? Do you know what I mean? Like, what are some of the, like, what's some of the language in the charter around membership structure behind her seat that folks need to be informed of before they move forward with a vote?
Move on. Okay. Next item, COC Governance Charter Work Group. To continue moving forward, the Strategic Planning Work Group's recommendation to update the COC's governance charter, MAG staff and the Strategic Planning Work Group are forming a charter update work group. MAG staff and/or Nikki Ramirez from the Strategic Planning Work Group will provide an update on their processes.
Hello. Okay, I just have a couple of updates from the recently formed work group for strategic planning. Let me see. So the work group continues to meet, and we have been discussing the processes that were approved in the last board meeting. So as a reminder, we approved 3 individual votes to move forward with the charter update, the MOU, and the RFI process. At this time, we will be forming a second work group to specifically go over the charter updates. And so we will have an invitation that goes out to all of the board members, in addition to all of the collaborative members, to see who would like to participate in this work group. We are going to structure the work group to have 12 seats. 6 are available to board members, 6 are available to collaborative members. And then this work group will be formed specifically to go through the charter updates, and we will begin this work through March, probably into April. We had our first session, a public session regarding the charter updates, and got some public input on what they would like to see included in that, as far as, you know, our COC and the any potential to expand scope in response to community needs. I was there at that session. It was a great, very productive session. A lot of good ideas came out of it. It was great to see the level of participation and just very thoughtful consideration around what we would like our COC to be. So that public session, those comments will be taken into consideration by the work group for the charter updates. And then that charter work group will go back to the original strategic planning work group with, I guess, a first draft of the charter. And the intention is to have that draft of the charter, once it's kind of approved through the strategic planning group, to also go back out to the public for comment, what is intended to be about a 2-week period. And then we'll go back to it again, do final edits, and then bring that back to the board for approval. And then lastly, we do have funding that has been identified and set aside to secure a third-party contractor to support us in the development of, or I guess the charter update. And that work, that will start in March as well. Any questions?
I'm just curious. MAG staff used to run the charter update before,
Mhm.
correct? So what is it connected to the discussions we had last meeting, or what? Is it allowed in our charter? I'm just trying to understand what changed.
Well, I think it's allowed. It's not specified in the charter, other than that the board has a process for biannually evaluating and revising the charter as necessary. And then last month, there was a recommendation that the board approved to update the charter, and then also to look for TA assistance in doing those updates. So I would say you all looked at that last month and approved to have TA involved. The only difference with this is that it's not HUD TA, it's a consultant because HUD's not able to provide TA at the moment.
So similar process, just more involvement, certainly from the board. The board's required to do the charter updates regardless. And this time we're just going to have a work group dedicated to working with MAG staff and private TA, since HUD TA couldn't be involved in the charter updates this time around.
I'll just make a comment too, Chris. I think, you know, we have experience doing the charter update and like just got out of that last, you know, pretty good, robust conversation, which I think is good in a board meeting. I think you want the conversation we just had. But we would absolutely benefit from having someone come in who's an expert in this space and can give us more than just what our HUD TA can provide to help us really pull those conversations forward and come out with something that is documented, that is responsive to all of these unique community needs that we can all, you know, use and act on. The other thing is we need to build out language around competitive processes for our staffing entities, which I don't have the expertise to do that and would need someone to come in and help. So I think this is going to be a great value for our continuum.
Any additional questions for Nikki or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Great. Item 6, we were going to, several members had requested an update on the family shelter system from UMOM. However, there was a staffing scheduling issue, so we will be postponing the presentation until next month. Okay. Family shelter system update by UMOM postponed till next month.
That's good.
All right. All right, next item up, the Arizona Housing Coalition legislative update. A representative from AHC will share their latest about the 2024 legislative priorities.
Hi, everybody. Is it possible for me to share the screen? If not, I can just talk through. And I'll apologize in advance. I'm still nursing a cold that struggles to go away. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to just jump right in. The YIGBY bill passed out of House Appropriations this morning. It was an interesting conversation, but it's making hay and looks to be crossing over. Next would be just fixing last year's adaptive reuse. This is one of the first to cross over to the Senate. And then this one is another continuation. It's making sure that RVs could be cooled. It's awaiting its assignment to the Rules Committee. Once it goes through Rules, it goes to the floor and then it crosses over. This one I have talked with the bill sponsor. I think we're getting there with the amendments. This one was the one where we just didn't like where it was moving the rules from. It was currently covered in Title 41, which is where there are enforcement of fair housing protections for tenants, to moving to Title 33. We, of course, want liability for landlords, but we were a little concerned about that language, but that's moving along. But as it relates to stuff that connects to our continuum, the drug-free homeless zone, the good news is it failed to pass committee, which meant the sponsor lost 2 members of his own caucus, and we're not exactly sure why. The good news is we are having a small group of stakeholders meet with the sponsor this week to go through why we think that we need to get rid of the penalties for staff members. And we think that because it failed to pass from committee, we may have a little bit more leverage to get him to go our way. So this is good news. It's not great news. Great news would be it's defeated outright, but it's moving in the right direction. In addition, the same sponsor held this bill, which was the Homeless Data Performance Audit bill, on the calendar. We don't know why he did. There's some speculation, but I hesitate to share it because I don't know for sure. But this was a bill that was going to crosswalk overdose data, recidivism data against homeless data. But those things are not outcomes that are identified as deliverables of the interventions that have been created. So we're really pretty concerned that this would be weaponized against the sector. A little bit of bad news is the mixed hoteling bill did receive a due pass recommendation out of committee. It is waiting to be assigned to the Rules Committee. This is a bill that would require any hotels that housed homeless folks to put up a sign in reception that discloses to people that there are homeless people present. I listened to the committee hearing. It was tough to listen to. Was very grateful to Michelle Jameson from US Vets, who did a beautiful job articulating why it's really an important tool, and people are placed there always with a case manager and only temporarily until another bed can be found. That's the reason that they're there. We're going to be having to do some wholesale lobbying to make sure that we defeat this, or have to go to the governor's office to ask her to veto it should it make its way across. Few other things I want to talk about, but as it relates to homelessness, there's this other thing I want to make everybody aware of. House Continuum Memorandum, HCM. It's a non-binding legislative document that expresses, in this case, the Arizona House's ongoing policy positions and recommendations. And in this case, they would like flexibility in federal dollars. Very specifically, they're asking for there not to be requirements for housing first. So this is essentially a postcard from the House to the Trump administration to change how federal dollars are expended as it relates to homelessness. We're opposed, but because it's really a request, and my understanding is that this request has happened from many states, we would really have to pivot to the federal level, our lobbying efforts. It just didn't make any sense to expend any political capital to fight it here, because really all the action will happen at the federal level. So while I take a drink of water so I can continue talking about the last couple of things, I wanted just to pause to see if anybody has any questions.
Quick question.
Yes.
This is my cues. On the motel hotel bill, I just trying to get some clarity. Would that mean that a victim of domestic violence, that maybe let's just say a woman and family with her kids, there's no room in a shelter, so she's in the safe temporary overflow program? Would that also apply to them, or then they would have to post that they are staying in the hotel?
I think not, but it's not spelled out. The thing is mixed hoteling is used by a lot of folks, Mike, including for domestic violence.
Yeah.
A lot for veterans. If there are no beds available, vets are put in hotels. Youth that are on their own.
From a
So it's
safe caution safety point of view, that could be very dangerous.
Yes, and our argument really, since we're dealing with the majority, is I think one argument was the consumer protection, but it's not something that the AG's office asked, because it's kind of buyer beware. Most people that stay at a hotel are going to go, and they're going to go on Priceline. They're going to see the ratings, and then they're going to choose what they can based on ratings and their budgets. So the signage doesn't serve any purpose as consumer protection. In addition, our argument was it's interfering with free market. Hotels are not mandated to be participatory in the program. They can opt out. In fact, there was a hotel that opted out of a veteran program because there were problems on the property. So hotel operators like to use this as an option because it fills rooms that would otherwise be empty. So we're trying to argue with the lawmakers or the things that would land with them, which is, this is not a protection. and it's interfering with free market. And these hotels might close if not being filled with these clients. We know that it'll be dangerous, but those arguments don't seem to hold a lot of water with some of these lawmakers. Okay, couple of other things. 8.0 renewals. So there are two bills. The Senate Bill 1357 is the one that we like better than the House bill. The Senate bill renews 8.0 for 4 years. The House bill attempted to renew it for 1. Both bills passed last week. That House committee meeting was brutal. Department of Housing and Joan did a great job, but they kind of showed their cards a little bit because of some of the saber rattling that went on in that committee about how they couldn't see even though they love LIHTC, they can't see renewing LIHTC because they don't trust the department. So it was pretty brutal. So that LIHTC renewal and expansion will go into budget negotiations. But what I think some of you know, because I've reached out to some folks over the weekend, is last week, Senate Republicans, the entire Senate Republican leadership team issued a press release calling for Joan to resign, which is pretty tough stuff. So I would encourage anybody that wants to support Joan, because she has opted not to resign, to write a letter on your letterhead and get it to the Senate to support her. One of the things I'm going to have to do is it's going to be a more powerful ask for our member organizations to go directly to the Senate as opposed to coming through the coalition. But I want to just pause because that's kind of a big deal and see if anybody has questions.
Is there any formal hearing or anything around this? It's just a request.
My understanding is that it is not going to, and I wouldn't hold me to it because things are changing on a minute by minute basis. My understanding is it's not going to the directors committee, the Dino committee again. That was the one that Jake Hoffman chaired when Joan went before them the first time. My understanding is that it's going to go directly to the floor. So it's going to be a tough path because it's going to be a tough path.
Nicole, last time didn't you have a template that was used and shared with everyone in terms of the letter of support when we were initially looking to, is it community support, Joan? Do you still have that template?
I had it for the Department of Housing. I didn't have it for Joan per se. But really the long and short is it would be a letter kind of from your point of view, because y'all have worked with her, about her integrity, because I think that they are weaponizing the audit to kind of undercut her integrity, which we all know is false. But speaking to her integrity, her commitment to the work, and the commitment to doing excellent work. And I think the most powerful letters can be just that. We as our organization, I have worked with Joan, and these are the things I've known her to be. I think that that's the best way. So I could templatize it for you, but the most powerful letters are going to be those personal letters.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. Did you have something?
I was going to put it out there to the COC board to see if maybe the COC board might want to write a letter to support Joan in this effort.
I would support that.
Okay, I would like to.
I would like to support Joan forever. She's been a tireless advocate in our community for years.
Okay. Not seeing anyone opposed to that. Brian, could you help us with that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you get a chance, like I made this analogy a little earlier, she's bravehearting this. I mean, this is a tough road, but she has an enormous amount of strength and intensity for not bowing to the request for resignation, knowing that it is going to be a brutal road ahead. So have her in your thoughts, send her all of the vibes, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nicole. So Brian, you'll follow up with that and we can all.
Yeah, we can put a draft together and just send it out for folks to look at. And then I think we have a way of doing this, or if not, we can make one where it goes out on COC letterhead. Probably would be good to have a signatory, but it could just say,
I'll sign.
okay.
Yeah, we'll sign.
Wouldn't we have to make a formal motion around it? Should we?
We haven't drafted it yet, so I'm not exactly sure. It could say MAG will draft and
Closer for action. So we can't vote on
Right.
anything.
And Brian, I can get you an email with the senators' email addresses. So that once you get it together and you've gotten it approved, you can send it directly. Because coming from y'all will be better than coming from the coalition at this point.
okay, thank you. And Emma, to your question, I mean, I would invite anybody to review the charter on this, but it's my understanding that this would be within the purview of the lead agency collaborative applicant to do. Just like creating work groups is and things like that. We come back here to tell you guys about it, but I don't know that this specifically requires language from the board.
So is it a letter representing the opinion of the board, or is it a letter representing the opinion of the COC as a body?
Okay. I don't think we should do it. I think we should do it individually as we can say that we're board members, but we cannot speak for everybody. Not every single person who's funded in COC is going to feel the same way. And I don't know that we should be doing that without giving them an opportunity to weigh in and say, yes, that they're effective or not effective. If we have personal opinions, I think you can write and say who you are and that you're on the board, but without an opportunity to vote on it and knowing how things blow up, I just am not sure that it's appropriate to do, regardless of how we may personally feel about it. And that was not something I wanted to say, so thank you for nobody throwing in.
Cricket, I think that's a good point.
I think it's actually stronger because it means more letters.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so then we will take that off the table, and each individually who choose to support our own. But if you could, Nicole, share that information with Brian in terms of who, and that way each individual can write their letters in support if they so choose.
He will have it before the close of this meeting.
Thank you. And then one last question, Nicole. You happened to mention the very first slide. We kind of went through the slide really quickly around the residences. Can you just share a little bit more on that, please?
On the yes in God's backyard?
Yes. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, please?
You bet. This is a bill, and we've worked pretty closely with the league to allow religious institutions to build affordable housing on properties. And some of the amendments include properties on which they also have a practicing church as opposed to just empty land. So it allows them not to have to go through some of the zoning process, but we've integrated a lot of the league's feedback as it relates to setbacks and distance and height. And I think we're down into the nitty-gritty with parking at this point. But it really is just to leverage the use of religious institutions' land, should they desire it, to build affordable housing. And there's a deed restriction within the bill. So, and I think it requires at least 40%, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm looking at you, Gabe, because sometimes you know more than I do on this one. But I think 40% have to be affordable units as defined by ADO, affordable.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Of course.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Does anyone have additional questions or comments? Thank you. All right. Next up, we're going to discuss health and housing opportunities H2O updates. Elizabeth DaCosta is going to provide an update on the program and where we're at in the process and next steps. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you so much. And I have TJ Reed joining me too from Solari. We're gonna do high level overview on just the updates because y'all have heard me present on a lot of these slides quite a bit. So for folks who haven't heard the larger presentation, I'm gonna make sure you have a link to our Access website where you can go over all the demonstration information and see historical presentations. We can go ahead and go next slide. So really important though, what I want to continue to iterate is our goals of the Housing and Health Opportunities Program. So at Access, prior to me coming here, folks before recognized the impact that housing has on our healthcare outcomes for our very vulnerable populations, not just helping them increase their positive health and well-being, but also looking at healthcare cost savings. So when we're not paying for someone to recidivate in an emergency department, but instead actually paying for them to live in an apartment, we see healthcare cost savings and also their ability to access more preventative care, which is a win for everyone. Additionally, then they're no longer sleeping on the streets and actually have a place to call home, which is best for our community, as we all know. We also seek to reduce homelessness and help members maintain housing stability. We can go next slide. So some of the new stuff, we still have our population of individuals who are eligible for this. So CMS, our federal partner, put out requirements that members must meet clinical and social risk factors. So it's not the Medicaid agency coming in and trying to cover health-related social needs for everyone. It's really looking at who are our most vulnerable members who will benefit from a healthcare perspective if they can access this resource. So it still is that members must be experiencing homelessness and also have a serious mental illness designation in the state of Arizona. In addition to those two, also have a diagnosed chronic physical health condition or have a history of justice involvement. So that's still the members who meet eligibility criteria for H2O as it is today. But we can go ahead and go next slide to talk about some of the new stuff. And this is still in draft format, but what you see on the screen is some data that's returned to us from a contract we have with ASU Cheer. So they have some researchers and data scientists who do a lot of analysis for Access to help us look at all kinds of different things. But the one we've asked them for to look at specifically for H2O is around predictive modeling. Because in this current environment, we really do want to show not only how we can house members who are currently suffering on our streets, but also how we can show that healthcare cost savings so we can continue to grow and expand the program for years to come. So what they're looking at here is looking at chronic physical health conditions that are drivers of healthcare costs that disproportionately impact persons experiencing homelessness. So just one example, as you can see, for acute kidney failure, there's about a $10,000 on average increased cost for people who are unhoused when they have that condition. And then it goes into additional effects of condition when it pertains to their anticipated inpatient stays, the likelihood of them using emergency room departments, and then also their admissions into our behavioral health residential facilities. So if you think about your continuum of healthcare services, if you can reduce members cycling through the emergency room and also decrease their admissions in behavioral health residential facilities, you then free up that healthcare setting for people who are really in need of that, help move people who might be in psychosis on the streets into a behavioral health residential facility, and overall provide some safety for the community. We can go ahead and go the last thing I'll mention about this is what we're doing with ASU is looking at how do we increase the chronic physical health conditions that we've established so far. So using this analysis to find out who is disproportionately impacted and then opening up our eligibility criteria to some additional chronic physical health conditions based on these results. We can go next slide. And then with this, I get to hand it actually over to our program administrator, Solari. And like I mentioned, TJ's here to go over the slide.
Thanks, Liz. Hey, y'all. This slide just showcases a little bit of the process and the step-by-step through the H2O program. So the goal of this is we get a large list that's updated by Access regularly of potentially eligible members. And so what we do is we work with our team and health homes to identify people who are going to be H2O eligible and can be approved for those services. So in the first step, if somebody is unable to be connected with, we are referring them to our outreach and education providers who are onboarded. Those providers are then going to seek to engage with the client and with the health home and us to get to see if that client could be approved for H2O services. So for those through outreach or those who are just engaged with outside of that, we'll go through an application process, and once approved, they will go into, pretty much everybody will go into pre-tenancy services. So pre-tenancy services, think about it like a navigator, like with rapid rehousing. Their job is to be with that client and support them from start to finish in getting into housing. That also includes all of the other associated things, right? Of like helping them get IDs, going apartment searching, getting work. Some of those clients will also get referred into enhanced shelter, which is right now it is effectively bridge housing. So we're onboarding providers in our community for to provide shelter, and we are putting people into those shelter beds once they're identified with a permanent voucher. And then the last step is really leveraging the assistance from H2O to provide services to people to get them into housing, and then ultimately transition to long-term care. So one of those is one-time transition and move-in costs. We do rental assistance. And then there is that case management piece that goes along with it. So the ultimate goal from here is that H2O services are not a permanent, or typically they're not going to be a permanent thing. We're working with clients to then transition them to either permanent supportive housing or long-term care. Our services are pretty flexible though, and they can work with clients as long as needed. It's not as rigid as a lot of our other things. But with that, the three core service types that we are actually actively onboarding partners in the community to provide is outreach and education, that pre-tenancy, tenancy, and enhanced shelter. And so with that, we'll go to the next slide. So you'll see this is kind of just a high-level breakdown of where people are at right now in those who have been determined eligible and who we're talking about. This is changing every day, and we are working to continue to increase the services that are provided. There will be a little bit more evening out with, not evening out, but Tucson and Phoenix have the majority of the folks who are potentially eligible, but there are folks across the entire state who are eligible for these services. One thing that I wanted to note for the COC board is we are trying our best and working within our space as Solari, who's been in the homeless space for a long time, to support and partner effectively with the continuums of care. So we've met a lot with with different continuums of care, and for as it pertains to this one, we've met with MAG to discuss the integration that can happen with H2O because there's so many opportunities. One of those that I'll just mention now is all of these providers are entering data into HMIS under typical service types. And we anticipate that this actually yields a lot of benefit for the continuums of care, specifically around the HUD scorecards. We're going to have a lot of, we're projecting to have a lot of good outcomes for this that are consistent with the system performance measures that are what is scored. So as an example, we are tracking like income improvements, and we're reporting out on that. And we're looking at that by member and how we can improve on that. And you'll see that as time goes on within the dashboards for the system and within the annual scorecards, right? Is that we hope that all the members who are going through H2O are really showing promising and good outcomes that will benefit the system as a whole. All right, so the next slide, please. This one just showcases a little bit about our efforts in onboarding partners. This shows on the left side of this table, you'll see our current contracts and some of the FTEs. Our goals by the end of this year are really to be able to service all of the 3,000. What's cool is we've worked really closely with a lot of partners in the community already, some of which are on this board. And we have commitments for over 100 FTEs right now to be done by June. And we are anticipating to meet the goal of having 200 FTEs by December to really fully servicing the entirety of those who are currently eligible. If you are interested, we have the link posted in this for providers or anybody watching who is interested in learning a little bit more about H2O. We do monthly information sessions for those who would potentially want to be partners. And there's a ton of information on this link for our website that shows the application, the process, our operations manual, Eventbrites for the information sessions, all of that. So we're really excited, honestly, and especially for me, coming from the COC world and working on H2O, being able to see a huge opportunity here for Access and the H2O program to really partner effectively with the continuums that leverage both of our strengths to really shift up the system in some ways of being able to service folks more by adding resources into this this pool for our folks experiencing homelessness here. And with that, I'll pass it back to Liz.
Thank you so much, TJ. So great to hear some additional resource now that we have our H2O program administrator in position and they're doing an excellent job. We can go next slide. So as TJ talked about, like we didn't want to come in with Medicaid with these additional services, funds to cover health related social needs and think like, how do we create this siloed Medicaid program? Instead, it is designed to truly act like water and like come in like as if it's liquid and go fill the gaps of what's happening within our homeless service system across the state. So there's several places that we're working towards that integration. The fact that Access now has a program that is fully in HMIS, that's the first time you'll actually see it now. It's like usually you'll see COC funded or ESG funded, but now it says Access and H2O. We are integrated into that data software system so that we are impacting the by name list. When a member gets housed under H2O, they're going to come off the by name list. When an outreach team interacts with somebody who's experiencing homelessness, they'll add a contact in there. It'll add that person back to the by name list. So we can go on and on about all the integration stuff we're doing, but one really important thing is this process of improving the whole workforce development. We have a mission under H2O to help improve the member and workforce experience as they operate within an integrated system. So these are just some of the key things we're finding. The first is that Access staff, our housing team, actually participates in the case conferencing that's happening for these members right now so that we can look at how our system design is being operationalized and then where are some of the barriers. We can also look at, as a state agency, what are the ways that we can interact with other state agencies to help improve some of those processes. So one example is we had a direct service organization who needed like a food stamp SNAP verification letter for a member to be able to move into their low income housing tax credit property. So all terms you've heard so far in the COC today. And they were scheduled to go take that person down to the DES office the next day to get that verification. Well, Access heard that, went back to Department of Economic Security, found that we can help them access My Family Benefits to just find a quick way that they can go online electronically to get the verification they needed. And then we're unraveling that even further, looking at how we can establish member consent so Access can get a direct data feed from Department of Economic Security through member consent, verifying the member's benefit amount. So we can just give that right over to the program administrator and completely remove that barrier from our direct service workers. The other thing is working on competency assessments rather than mandating training. So developing competency assessments around their ability to think critically in the housing space and then having them take those assessments rather than, like I said, mandating a training that maybe they already have the skills for. They don't need to go spend time going through a training. Instead, they can just be assessed and then we can really evaluate, well, where should we spend the time in training them and developing them further? And then the last one I'll mention on this slide is the development of SOPs. And with that, we can go to the next slide. So this just further kind of describes the integration we're trying to do. It was actually a Maricopa County COC strategy in our strategic plan to help create community adopted standard operating procedures. We had tried to task that to our ESG collaborative, and we just realized we needed a lot more resources for this. So Access has contracted with ASU to come in and help us create these standard operating procedures, but then make them statewide. We can go next slide. The idea is that when we develop them within the continuum, we can then apply them to the practices that the H2O providers are following. So whether a member is getting services in a continuum of care or ESG funded shelter or through the Medicaid enhanced shelter, a lot of the services are the same and built around these standard operating procedures. So assessment completion times, the development of a housing care plan, staff to member ratios, the understanding of how to complete a housing assessment, just giving some of those core components to that specific intervention, documenting it, and then helping to align it. So you can see that we did our first kickoff February 6th. We had a great turnout. People from all over the state came and met us at the county office downtown, had the first iteration and conversation around how we're going to do this. The next thing that we've asked folks to do, so if you were asked, please get this done, is ASU has a locked generative AI platform where ASU funds it. And it can access AI, generative AI from the system, but whatever ASU puts into it is locked and does not go out into the system. And so we've asked that providers who are providing this work right now send over their policies, procedures, operation manuals, so that we can use generative AI to come out and tell us some of the key components that we already have across the state with our standard operating procedures, also look at best practice nationally to then pull out some templates for us to then come back and reconvene as a group to decide, okay, yes, these are the things we want in there and these are the things we don't. We're working on developing these standard operating procedures across 6 interventions: prevention, outreach, shelter, recovery housing, rapid rehousing, and then permanent supportive housing. We can go next slide. So these are the core things we're looking at within those 6 interventions: core service requirements, the program structure and workflow. Outcome and performance measures is really important. We need to be able to very clearly tell our stories every time this stuff comes up, every time a legislative session comes up. We need to be able to very clearly indicate these are the outcomes we've been able to achieve through all of our homeless service programs. And so if we can align with the outcomes we're tracking, we can create a system that better tracks them and can better communicate it. We're looking at community integration and making sure we continue on with that lived experience engagement, establishing those safety and crisis protocols, including how folks access Narcan, and then professional development and staff support. Next slide, and then last one. We understand that the first task is to go and develop these standard operating procedures, but then it's actually really important to figure out how you're going to actually execute that. So how do we kind of take these documented procedures off the shelf and help be able to have our rural communities be able to execute that? So this slide just basically talks about the fact that ASU is also going to bring forward solutions for us for implementation. We can go next. And then I can open it up if anyone has questions. And thank you so much for letting me and TJ share the updates.
I would just say very impressive.
Liz, thank you. Thank you for giving us the update. I do have a question for you, Liz. When referrals are given to providers and there is a chronic health condition for a particular member, and that member might be in outreach, is that information shared with providers so they might know, hey, this person's on dialysis. My first appointment should be to PCP if I engage them, or to a medical center, just as a means to ensure that when you're outreaching members, you're addressing the most acute and chronic issue first and foremost?
We did, since implementation, Solari has created a face sheet that gets sent out to providers. I think the most important thing for people to take away today is that these members have a serious mental illness, and we have a requirement, and it's called Title IX, Chapter 21, that their regional behavioral health authority, their health plan, ensure that member is assigned to a health home within 5 days of designation. So H2O is a supplement program to help address housing insecurity and income instability. But we have an entire massive system within our healthcare system where that member has a health home, and they're responsible for all physical, behavioral health needs, and also helping to address community needs. So that member should already be getting all of those services from their health home. What we are finding right now is that when they are homeless and they don't have the housing resource, sometimes they are staying in our shelters. Sometimes they're in CAS and they've got this chronic physical condition and this SMI health home. And so H2O is working to serve as a conduit and trying to connect between the homeless service system back into that health home. That's where that physical health needs are really going to be addressed.
Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question. What has been your experience to date working with the coordinated entry partners? As you did say that you're going to case conferencing, and it seems like you're filling a whole lot of gaps and providing resources. Just very curious.
Yeah, we're actually we have a separate internal H2O case conferencing where we're just focusing in on the H2O members right now. So that's where I'm telling you that we're doing all this learning within Access about program operations and design. Our next place we're going to go is to the continuum of care to talk about coordinated entry prioritization. We're trying to make sure though that we unravel this conversation a little bit further and bring forward some data that people can really be able to look at and make decisions on. Because what happens is oftentimes a new program comes up and then we want coordinated entry prioritization to focus on maybe a specific population, right? But this is really focused on prioritization for system integration, the integration with the homeless service system and the healthcare system, where homeless services pays for the housing subsidy. Medicaid does a better job at paying for the supportive services. So we're just in the first stages, I think, of those conversations, and it's on us right now. We've got to get some really good data together and clearly document what our ask is of coordinated entry to drive that conversation forward. It's a great question.
Do you have numbers? Because you said that you're pulling folks off the by name list. Do you have those numbers at this point in time?
That's exactly the stuff that we're doing. And at TJ, I don't know if you have anything to add on this.
Yeah, I would just say we have done some already, Tish, of looking at the crossover of like who is on the by name list versus who is on our H2O list. And there is a lot of crossover. And that's really one of the things that prompted this is we said, okay, well, in some ways, when other systems of care have looked at integrating prioritization, it's been challenging because you're kind of just picking populations over others, right? Where it's like, well, yeah, veterans needs a lot of services. DV needs a lot of services, families, youth, older, right? And it's like, it can be like really hard to look at all those and try to pit them against each other and say one needs it more than the other. The beauty of this is we're not necessarily talking about subpopulations, we're talking about acuity, right? Or need. And so to even be on this list, they have to be SMI and have a chronic health condition. So we've already kind of medically confirmed a very, very high level of vulnerability. So what we're trying to do is identify then how we can kind of tie that into the homeless services system, because acuity is a part of HUD's prioritization. And so there's seemingly a lot of opportunity here for us to not even have to sacrifice on either side of our priorities, but to just say, let's just talk and figure this out, because there's a lot of crossover already. And then we can put together that ask, like Liz said. What we want to do is we want to say, here is what we're looking at. Here's the exact amount of crossover. Here is the impact that this would make on the by name list if we did anything with housing for H2O. And here's the resources that would be added that could add value in terms of a budget perspective to the continuum of care and their housing, right? Because we have rental assistance in short term. If we can infuse a lot of rental assistance into the system, does that allow for the COC budget to open up a little bit more and service more people if we collaborate well, right? So that was a little long-winded, Tish, but hopefully that helps kind of understand where we're coming from and why we're looking at this.
Thank you, thank you. And one last question. Can you share that competency assessment that you use? We've had a whole lot of discussion about training resources and leadership training potential amongst all of our agencies as providers, trying to build that bridge toward, career development within our field. So it would be great if you could share some of those resources, because I think it's going to be really critical that we jump on board sooner than later in training and developing our staff.
Yeah, it's huge, but it's like at Medicaid, we have an entire infrastructure around workforce development and like required positions at the health plan level. And this like association of like innovative workforce development, like resource was available. So literally, Tish, we're like pulling all that Medicaid infrastructure and figuring out, well, what are the best parts about this that we want to apply to H2O that we can then bleed into the continuum of care. So yeah, as soon as we develop all this stuff, we're going to share it.
Yeah, and Tish, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tish.
I just said I'm asking for a lot.
Yeah, well, and I'll just add on to what Liz said too, is we are working with the Corporation for Supportive Housing as well, and we're establishing a amendment to our current contract that's going to focus on training and development. And they are actually going to be pairing with ASU as that SOP gets completed for the service types. We're going to have CSH look at that and build out trainings based on those SOPs. And what we've asked them, and what's in the amendment that is still in draft mode right now, is to build it out for shelter outreach and rapid rehousing that have modules for H2O, but that are not entirely about H2O, so that those trainings could actually be just given to all of the COCs to have basic like training modules on the standard operating procedures for shelter outreach and rapid. So the hope is that that really does benefit the system as a whole. And I think that's probably a microcosm of what I think Liz at Access and myself at Solari, we're all trying to do is how can we, again, not just create a silo, but if we're going to be spending resources on these things, can we integrate, but also can we just share information? Like if we're developing something, can we slightly adapt how it's developed to have a much broader reach than it just be only useful for like our H2O service providers?
Thank you. I look forward to the integration.
Thanks. I think Nathan's got his hand up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love H2O and everything you guys are doing. So I have probably 3 questions. I'll only ask one, which is, I mean, are you all running into challenges that providers may have, particularly with enhanced shelter? The fact that they're already receiving some government funds and don't want to run afoul of supplanting laws, need to figure out how to apply these funds without double dipping, basically. Like, have you run into that? How are you all resolving that if you have?
Yeah, it's come up quite a bit. So it's a great question, Nate. And so we follow the HUD guidance for duplication of benefits policy. So there's a requirement that HUD actually take lead on establishing the policies for duplication of benefits across fund sources. So they have a toolkit and everything. And we can send out the link. But basically, it's a shelter needs to look at their overall operation expenses, their fund sources that are coming in, and make sure that their fund sources do not exceed their operational expenses. So whether a particular provider ends up hiring more staff to get to the enhanced shelter ratio of 1 to 25, builds out some kind of improvement with their supplies for their members, adds a little bit of clinical expertise, whatever you need to do to get to the operational, not exceeding your operational exceeding your funding.
Yeah, and
federal funding.
Nathan, go ahead, Nathan. Sorry.
Just to clarify, when you say funding, we're talking about like federal funding, not private funding.
I'll send you the duplication of benefits toolkit from HUD because they do ask that you include all fund sources.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and Nathan, one of the things to keep in mind, most shelters are not being entirely funded by singular federal grants, right? And so, like as an example with ESG, if a shelter is getting ESG, it is very unlikely that ESG grant is specifying that only those funds can be used for all of those clients and no other funds can be used. So it's just a matter of working within what Liz just described to say, this is done quite frequently right now where shelters, right? And I know Cass is too, right? Of like getting multiple federal sources, and just our hope is that it bolsters, right? And allows for not duplicating, but adding value to the shelters.
Yeah, just reiterate, I'd love to see that document. I can dig into that myself. That'd be great. I appreciate y'all.
Yeah, it's a whole toolkit. You got it. Thank you so much.
All right, I think that's it. Liz, TJ, thanks again for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, moving along. Next up, we have HUD updates. MAG staff will provide updates on issues related to funding received from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Staff will present on the impact of potential disruptions in funding, as well as strategies to address these.
Thank you, Co-Chair Phillips. This is Brian with MAG. Next slide, please. So we did a little bit of you'll find this is pretty high level data. Most of it's from existing data sources. We reached out and asked some folks questions, and we're doing some follow up and trying to patch together funding that we don't already have access to. So you'll see we have some things that we'd like to report on and not everything, but this is really continuing the impact assessment we sent an email about a month ago to everybody. after the executive order dropped on January 28th. So since then, we've been looking at kind of what a similar executive order does mean in terms of funding loss. And then kind of the bigger question is, what does long-term funding loss look like or potentially look like? The latter really, I think, is, we don't have a lot of information about this, just kind of what trickles in through the news. And we hear some reports are that HUD is cutting staffing and things like that. Again, we don't have any confirmation on that. We're just trying to report on what we do know and sort of indicate what the extent of the damage might be if it does go that way. So that's what this is about. Next slide, please. So in the event of another sudden freeze, we basically looked at COC funding here and how long existing COC programming could sustain without funding coming in, right? So most programs can last for a couple of months. At least that's what they reported back to us. Some programs don't have any flexibility at all. And so you see that within 30 days, you have almost 1,000 people going into default on rent. This isn't really talking at all about supportive services. This is just rental obligations. And then after 60 days, 2 months, you'd have upwards of 2,000 in the same situation. So altogether, you'd have around 3,500 people who were really in a tough spot with their rental obligations. Next slide, please. So the upshot of all of that is that you've got projects that just wouldn't be able to pay, clients that could potentially go into default as a result. And then, if facing eviction, there isn't a whole lot of other safety net to catch folks. So, I don't know that we need to spell this out, but the third bullet is kind of worst case scenario. And next slide, please. This is exactly what I just said. The thing that I would point out really for this group is that I think this is kind of what we want to report out. So we anticipate putting together a more formal report, maybe 2-3 pages that would go out potentially to elected officials or other folks in the community besides this board. So we're working on something like that to send, working with MAG staff to put that together. But it's really, that's kind of the message at the end of it, is that this would have a huge impact on the community. Next slide, please. So if HUD were to decline to honor funding commitments, this is kind of what you'd expect to see. So we know that on the 17th of January, HUD said this is how much money you all should expect to get. 52 million, we reported back on that in January's meeting. That was really good news then. The trouble is that they haven't actually issued any contracts as far as we're aware. And so in the first quarter, there are 2 programs that have contracts that should be executed. Those are both ABC programs. Charles isn't here to comment, but my understanding is that they typically sign those contracts later in the year, typically in the second quarter. That's routine for them. It's not a big deal for them. But this year it kind of is, because if those contracts are not forthcoming, they'll be essentially they will have spent money essentially on those contracts that aren't forthcoming. So that's first quarter, 445 people would be at risk from those programs. Second quarter, this is the program, this number of programs would be executing contracts. Sorry, it's not 100, it's not 1,877 programs. It's programs representing that many units or beds. And then third quarter and then fourth quarter. Next slide, please. And then, so what this would mean is just that programs that are already paying would not necessarily receive reimbursement. And then again, bullets 2 and 3, this is what we would anticipate happening if HUD did not put funding through. And then next slide. we have started the process of pulling together additional COC, non-COC HUD funding. So ESG, HOPWA, VA. We've been looking also at DDBG. And then, so based on the data we've pulled together so far, you're looking at a little over 1,000 people who receive that funding who would be without funding at that point. And then next slide, please. This is the financial impact that we've pulled together so far. We have not pulled in other federal funding that's not HUD funded or non-federal funding. So we'll see how much of that we're able to pull together. There's a law of diminishing returns issue here. Like we could spend a year on this and probably get it all, but we're trying to put something out relatively quickly. In any case, we're already up to $100 million just about in federal funds that could be at risk. And so that's quite a splash. Next slide. So we're working on, as mentioned, an impact report to release out. We're looking at additional federal funding streams. And last but not least, we, as you know, have a communication work group. We've already started a conversation with our work group about what could a crisis response plan look like in the event of another freeze. And then in addition, just in terms of general messaging, how do we direct attention to this issue and so forth. So we're anticipating having a report ready for this group next month, hopefully, assuming there's time for that on the agenda and all of that. And I think that's it. Tyler, can you go? Oh, last but not least, we're all in this together. We don't really know what's going to happen. It's a little scary, but we just, one step in front of the other, and we're all here for you as much as we can be of support. If there's any questions, happy to take those.
Thank you, Brian. That was sad. That was disheartening. That was very disheartening.
Those are just the number of beds, but for agencies that do not have deep pockets, it's potentially catastrophic. And most agencies don't.
Moving on to the next topic. Thank you, Brian. Next item, planning grant budget review. MAG staff will present an overview of the planning grant funds received every year and how these are used to support MAG's work on behalf of the COC.
Me again. This is Brian. Next slide, please. I should have put like some flowers in this. I should have made this one fun. So we wanted to bring back just a high level. This is what the planning grant looks like, and this is kind of how we use the funding, and answer any questions that you all might have about that. So we'll go through that real quickly. High level here, we really look at 3 different things with the planning grant: staffing, consulting, and external expenses, which we'll go through in a minute in detail, and then travel, which is just we try to send some staff to conferences every year. We go to the Housing Coalition conference, for example, and some things like that. And you can see the percentages and the total there. And we'll get into a little more detail on these and then wrap it up with any questions you might have. So if you could go to the next slide. So in terms of staffing, which was, as you saw, the bulk of the expenditure, we spent a lot of time doing coordination activities. That's pulling together the collaboratives, pulling together these board meetings, and so forth. We do a lot of evaluation and monitoring. That's an annual requirement under HUD. And then the NOFO application, obviously, and then other activities really includes things like GIS work on the pit count and pulling together the outreach tool and so forth, things like that. Next slide, if you would. And I wanted to go through real quick, external costs not related to staffing. So we do stipends to the tune of about 15,000 a year. This is for like the Lived Experience Collaborative and our Youth Action Board. And then we have our learning management system that we pay out on a contract every year for. We have a handful of memberships. Arizona Housing Coalition is one example. And then wanted to mention this other consulting at the bottom. This is money that we can use to pay for TA as needed. So that's available. We plan for that every year, but it's also something that we would love to get feedback from you all on if you have thoughts on how to spend that money. That is all I have for now, but happy to go into any other questions. And if needed, we can certainly come back with a more detailed report.
I had a couple questions. Thank you very much, Brian. I know a few of us have asked for this information, so that was really helpful. Does it roll over if you don't spend the funds, or is it use or lose at 1.5 million a year?
Use or lose.
Okay. And so do you have an idea of like, is that where are we like this year?
That I did not bring.
Okay.
I can tell you that we're on track. So I meet with our fiscal department. When we talk about other things that we spend money on, that's one of the things that we spend money on is having our finance department dedicate staff time to tracking all of this in detail. They help with our budgeting every year when we do the NOFO and things like that. So we're on track for spend down, and we meet our spend down every year.
Okay. I just think that would be good for the board to have sort of a budget update at its meeting every year. It doesn't have to be a full presentation, but just having like where we are with spending every year. So we know if that, say that consulting funds, whether or not those are available.
You got it.
So Brian, you're saying that you meet that spend down pretty much every year?
Yeah.
And do you have a challenge with that with vacancy rate for your staff turnover rate?
Great question. Well, we've had a pretty consistent staffing for the last 2 years now, which has been great. But in addition to that, I think there's always, as you'll know, there's things that you can do to help hit the mark on that. So we have the option of pulling in TA as needed. We can even do internships if we need to do that, and we've had amazing interns, so that's been beneficial as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
You bet.
Next up.
I have a question. I think it would also be helpful if we got just FTE data, Brian, on kind of overall, just to get a context of like how many staff people we're talking about, right?
I can offer a real quick overview of that. So we have about 5 staff, 6 staff with the vacancy that we tied directly to the HUD grant. That are, and 5 of those I think are essentially full-time HUD staff, COC staff. And then we have additionally up to 14 folks who work on COC funded project stuff. So pit count for several months out of the year, we have somebody who's a GIS expert working on that. We have ongoing support from IT and GIS work on our outreach viewer and things like that. So that'll give you a rough idea. And if needed, again, we can bring in more detail on that.
Just a quick question on the support teams that you mentioned. Are those partial allocations?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, in addition, are you making any changes based upon the federal outlook to your staffing plans right now?
So I think we're filling 1 vacancy. We are kind of always looking at that. We've made the internal decision that it's worth filling a vacancy. We have enough time before the end of our contract that it makes sense to do that. But I think anytime we look at another position, and I'll just say, at our last turnover, as you'll be aware, Dylan Belmont left this last month, and before moving forward with hiring decision, we took a hard look internally at like what we needed to accomplish, what was the best plan to move forward. It's a great question.
Okay. No additional questions. We'll move on. Thank you. Right. Next item, MAG update. MAG staff will provide updates on ongoing collaborative applicant duties and projects.
So last thing, wanted to just, a couple of things that we were going to bring forward that we've just put off a little bit, and I wanted to call attention to those and just let you know we haven't forgot. We are still working on system modeling and an ARPA update. We are scheduled to bring in the homeless trends report to finalize round out 2024. We're looking at next month, hopefully, for that. And then there have been 2 forums, one of which was the charter forum folks mentioned, and then a coordinated entry forum, which Natalie and our team headed up along with the coordinated entry collaborative. We've gotten some questions about that. Just want to let you know we're pulling in all of the feedback from those still, but should have some type of reporting on that, whether that's at the board meeting or just an email out with resources, but within the month. And then last but not least, in light of uncertainty around federal funding, we are pulling together a list of funding priorities that we would love to share out with the board. So these are things that we see as really critical to the COC operation. And then we love feedback. And then I think eventually start thinking through with you all how we can start pulling in non-federal funding. We're just starting that process, but it seems like it's time to start thinking about it.
Thank you for that, Brian. I know that's something that we had talked about as a group, so look forward to hearing some of that information. Any additional comments or questions? All right. Next up, request for future agenda items. Do board members have any other action or discussion items for future meetings?
May I make a recommendation? So wanted to close the loop on the board member who just turned out. So Danielle Wright turned out. The board saw fit to pass a measure or to vote on an update to the charter just this at this board meeting. But I want to make sure that there is a process, or if there should be a process, I want to make sure we address that to actually do that election. So the board said it's okay to do an election or to elect, to consider somebody staying on after they term out. Get my words in order here, but I don't know what the process is for doing that yet. So as I'll be the one writing up the agenda and sharing it with the co-chairs, if we want to have a process for doing that, I'll need a little more instruction on it. For example, at the March meeting, we could put it on the agenda to consider somebody who's termed out recently and then talk about whether they continue to fill the appropriate seats, and then vote on whether or not to re-elect them, essentially. So if you want to do that, let me know and we can add it to the agenda.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's a good idea. I think the first step would probably just getting with the members who's turned out. Maybe they want to term out. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's do that at the next.
All right. Any other discussion around that? Okay, board roundtable. The next item is the roundtable. This is where we'll open up the floor for any opportunities, events, challenges, or anything that you would like to address. Do any board members have any thoughts that they'd like to share?
Just like to share that Project Connect is this Wednesday in Surprise, excuse me, at Salvation Army.
Thank you. Any other updates or events? All right. No? All right. With no further business, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.